Chapter 34. Reunion. Kaladevi told the king, queen, and Yasodhara the news of the Buddha's imminent arrival, and then, taking just his begging bowl, set off alone to meet the Buddha on his way to Kapilavatthu. Kaladevi walked with the serene, slow steps of a bhikkhu. He walked days and rested nights, pausing only briefly in tiny hamlets along the way to beg for food. Wherever he went, he announced that Prince Siddhartha had found the way and was about to return home. 9 days after he left Kapilavatthu, Kaladevi met the Buddha and 300 bhikkhus travelling with him. Moggallana, Kondana, and Kassapa brothers had remained with the other bhikkhus in Bamboo Forest. At Kaladevi's suggestion, the Buddha and his bhikkhus rested the night in Nigrodha Park, 3 miles south of Kapilavatthu. The following morning, they entered the city to beg. The sight of 300 bhikkhus wearing saffron robes, peacefully and silently holding their bowls to beg, made a deep impression on the city's people. It did not take long for news of their arrival to reach the palace. King Suddhodana ordered a carriage be readied at once to take him out to meet his son. Queen Mahaprajapati and Yasodhara waited anxiously within the palace. When the king's carriage entered the eastern sector of the city, they encountered the bhikkhus. The carriage driver recognized Siddhartha first. "Your Majesty, there he is. He walks ahead of the others and his robe is a bit longer." Astonished, the king recognized that the bhikkhu, clad in a saffron robe, was indeed his own son. The Buddha radiated majesty and seemed almost surrounded by a halo of light. He was standing holding his bowl in front of a shabby dwelling. In his serene concentration, it appeared that the act of begging was at that moment the most important thing in his life. The king watched as a woman dressed in tattered clothes came out of the poor hut and placed a small potato in the Buddha's bowl. The Buddha respectfully received it by bowing to the woman. He then moved on to the next house. The king's carriage was still some distance from where the Buddha stood. The king asked his driver to halt. He stepped out of the carriage and walked towards the Buddha. Just then, the Buddha saw his father approaching. They walked towards each other. The king with hurried steps, the Buddha with calm, relaxed steps. "Siddhartha, father!" Nagasamala came up to the Buddha and took his teacher's bowl, enabling the Buddha to hold the king's hands in his own 2 hands. Tears streaming down the king's wrinkled cheeks, the Buddha gazed at his father, his eyes filled with loving warmth. The king understood that Siddhartha was no longer the crown prince, but a respected spiritual teacher. He wanted to embrace Siddhartha, but felt that might not be proper. Instead, he joined his palms and bowed to his son in the manner a king greets a high-ranking spiritual teacher. The Buddha turned to Sariputta, who was nearby, and said, "The bhikkhus have completed their begging. Please lead them back to Nigrodha Park. Nagasamala will accompany me to the palace where we can eat our food. We will return to the sangha later in the afternoon." Sariputta bowed, then turned to lead the others back to the park. The king looked long and hard at the Buddha before saying, I thought surely you would come to the palace to see your family first. Who could have guessed you would instead go begging in the city? Why didn't you come to eat at the palace? The Buddha smiled at his father. Father, I am not alone. I have travelled with a large community, the community of bhikkhus. I too am a bhikkhu, and like all other bhikkhus, beg for my food. But must you beg for food at such poor dwellings as these around here? No one in the history of the Sakya clan has ever done such a thing. Again, the Buddha smiled. Perhaps no Sakya has ever done so before, but all bhikkhus have. Father, begging is a spiritual practice which helps a bhikkhu develop humility and see that all persons are equal. When I receive a small potato from a poor family, it is no different than when I receive an elegant dish served by a king. A bhikkhu can transcend barriers that discriminate between rich and poor. On my path, all are considered equal. Everyone, no matter how poor he is, can attain liberation and enlightenment. Begging does not demean my own dignity. It recognizes the inherent dignity of all persons. King Suddhodana listened with his mouth slightly agape. The old prophecies were true. Siddhartha had become a spiritual teacher whose virtue would shine throughout the world. Holding the king's hand, the Buddha walked with him back to the palace. Nagasamala followed them. Thanks to a palace attendant who spotted the bhikkhus and called out, Queen Gotami, Yasodhara, Sadari Nanda, and young Rahula were able to watch the encounter between the king and the Buddha from a palace balcony. They saw how the king bowed to the Buddha. As the king and the Buddha neared the palace, Yasodhara turned to Rahula. She pointed to the Buddha and said, Dear son, do you see that monk holding your grandfather's hand, about to enter the palace gates? Rahula nodded. That monk is your father. Run down and greet him. He has a very special inheritance to pass to you. Ask him about it. Rahula ran downstairs. In a flash, he reached the palace courtyard. He ran towards the Buddha. The Buddha knew at once that the little boy running towards him was Rahula. He opened his arms wide and embraced his son. Almost out of breath, Rahula gasps, Respected monk, Mother said I should ask you about my spiritual inheritance. What is it? Can you show it to me? The Buddha patted Rahula's cheek and smiled. You want to know about your inheritance? All in good time. I will pass it on to you. The Buddha took the boy's hand in his, while still holding the king's hand. Together, the three of them entered the palace. Queen Gotami, Yasodhara, Sadari Nanda came downstairs and saw the king, the Buddha, and Rahula entering the royal gardens. The spring sunshine was pleasantly warm. Flowers blossomed everywhere, and birds warbled sweet songs. The Buddha sat down with the king and Rahula on a marble bench. He invited Nagasamala to be seated too. At that moment, Queen Gotami, Yasodhara, and Sadari Nanda entered the gardens. The Buddha immediately stood up and walked towards the three women. Queen Gotami was a picture of good health. She wore a sari, the colour of cool green bamboo. Gotpa was as beautiful as ever, although she appeared somewhat pale. Her sari was as white as fresh fallen snow. She wore no jewels or ornaments. The Buddha's younger sister, now 16 years old, wore a gold sari which set off her shining black eyes. The woman joined their palms and bowed low to greet the Buddha. The Buddha joined his palms and bowed in return. Then he called out, "Mother, Gopa." Hearing his voice call out their names, both women began to weep. The Buddha took the Queen's hand and led her to sit down on a bench. He asked, "And where is my brother Nanda?" The Queen answered, "He is out practicing martial arts. He should return soon." "Do you recognize your younger sister? She has grown much in your absence, wouldn't you say?" The Buddha gazed at his sister. He had not seen her in more than 7 years. "Sundari Nanda, you're a young woman now." Then the Buddha approached Yasodhara and gently took her hand. She was so moved, her hand trembled in his. He led her to sit beside Queen Gotami and then sat back on his own bench. On the walk back to the palace, the king had asked the Buddha many questions, but now no one spoke, not even Rahula. The Buddha looked at the king and queen, Yasodhara and Sundari Nanda. The joy of reunion shone in everyone's face. After a long silence, the Buddha spoke. "Father, I have returned. Mother, I have returned. See, Gopa, I came back to you." Again, the two women began to cry. Their tears were tears of joy. The Buddha let them silently weep, and then he asked Rahula to sit beside him. He patted the boy's hair affectionately. Gotami wiped her tears with the edge of her sari, and smiling at the Buddha said, "You were gone a very long time. More than 7 years have passed. Do you understand how courageous a woman Gopa has been?" "I have long understood the depth of her courage, Mother. You and Yasodhara are the two most courageous women I know. Not only have you offered understanding and support to your husbands, but you are models of strength and determination for all. I have been very lucky to have both of you in my life. It has made my task much easier." Yasodhara smiled, but she did not speak. The king said, "You have told me a bit about your search for the way, up to your ordeals of self-mortification. Could you repeat all you've told me for the others to hear, and then continue?" The Buddha told them about his long search for the way, in brief. He told them about meeting King Bimbisara on the mountain, and about the poor children of Uvira village. He told them about his 5 friends who had practiced austerities with him, and about the great reception the bhikkhus received in Rajagha. Everyone listened intently. Not even Rahula budged. The Buddha's voice was warm and affectionate. He did not dwell on details, and he spoke only sparingly of his period of self-mortification. He used his words to sow helpful seeds of awakening in the hearts of those closest to him. An attendant came out of the garden and whispered something in Gotami's ear. The Queen whispered something back, Soon after, the attendant prepared a table in the garden for the noon meal. Just as the food was being placed upon the table, Nanda arrived. The Buddha greeted him joyfully. Nanda, when I left, you were only 15. Now you're a grown man. Nanda smiled. The queen chastised him. Nanda, greet your elder brother properly. He is a monk now. Join your palms and bow. Nanda bowed, and the Buddha bowed to his younger brother in return. They all moved to the table. The Buddha asked Naga Samala to sit beside him. A serving maid brought out water for everyone to wash their hands. The king asked the Buddha, "What did you receive in your begging bowl?" "I received a potato." But I noticed that Nagasamala did not yet receive anything. King Suddhodana stood up. "Please allow me to offer both of you food from our table." Yasodhara held the platters while the king served the two bhikkhus. He placed fragrant white rice and vegetable curry into their bowls. The Buddha and Nagasamala ate in silence, mindfulness, and the others followed their example. Birds continued to sing throughout the garden. When they had finished eating, the queen invited the king and the Buddha to sit again on the marble benches. A servant brought out a platter of tangerines, but Rahula was the only one to eat his. Everyone else was too absorbed in listening to the Buddha recount his experiences. Queen Gotami asked more questions than anywhere else. When the king heard about the hut the Buddha lived in at Bamboo Forest, he resolved to have a simple one built in Nigrodha Park for him. He expressed his hope that the Buddha would remain for several months in order to teach them the way. Queen Gotami, Yasodhara, Nanda, and Sundari Nanda voiced their joyous approval of the king's suggestion. At last, the Buddha said it was time for him to return to his bhikkhus in the park. The king rose and said, "I would like to invite you and all the bhikkhus for a meal offering, just as the king of Magadha did. I will invite all the royal family and members of the government at the same time, so that they can hear you speak about the way." The Buddha said he would be glad to accept the invitation. They arranged for the gathering to take place in 7 days. Yasodhara expressed a desire to invite the Buddha and Kaladayu for a private meal in the Eastern Palace. The Buddha accepted her invitation as well, but suggested it would be best to wait until a few days after the king's reception. The king wanted to order a carriage to take the Buddha and Nagasamala back to Nigrodha Park, but the Buddha refused. He explained that he preferred to travel by foot. The entire family accompanied the two bhikkhus to the palace's outer gates. They all joined their pan respectfully and bid the two bhikkhus farewell. Chapter 35. Early morning sunshine. News of Siddhartha's return spread quickly throughout the rest of Kapilavatthu, confirmed by the serene presence of the bhikkhus begging every morning in the city. Many families made food offerings and were eager to hear the bhikkhus speak about the teachings. King Suddhodana asked the people to decorate the city streets with banners and flowers in preparation for the day the Buddha and the bhikkhus were invited to eat at the palace. He also lost no time in having small huts built in Nigrodha Park for the Buddha and his senior students. Many people came to the park to meet the Buddha and his bhikkhus. The people were impressed to see the former prince calmly begging in the city. The Buddha's return became the main topic of conversation among all the townspeople. Gotami and Yasodhara wanted to visit the Buddha at Nigrodha Park, but they were too busy that first week preparing for the reception of the sangha. The king wanted to invite several thousand guests, including all the members of the government, as well as all those in the city who held other political, cultural, and religious positions. He ordered that all dishes for the meal be vegetarian. Prince Nanda, however, did find the time to visit the Buddha twice that week. He listened to the Buddha explain the path of awakening to him. Nanda loved and respected his elder brother, and he felt himself being drawn to the peaceful life of bhikkhu. He even asked the Buddha whether or not he would make a good bhikkhu, but the Buddha only smiled. He could see that although Nanda was a young man of admirable feelings and good intentions, he did not yet possess a strong sense of purpose or commitment. When he sat with the Buddha, Nanda wanted to become a monk, but when he returned to the palace, he had eyes and thoughts only for his lovely fiancée, Kalanani. Nanda wondered what the Buddha thought about his equivocation. The day for the reception arrived. The entire city, including the royal palace, was decked with banners and flowers to welcome the Buddha and his sangha. The city bustled with excitement as the entire population formally welcomed home their heroic countryman. Musicians played beautifully as crowds lined the streets. Everyone strained to catch a glimpse of the Buddha. Gotami and Yasodhara personally welcomed all the guests that had been invited by the king. Gopa had even given in to the queen's wishes that she dress in an elegant sari and wear jewels in honor of the occasion. The Buddha and the bhikkhus walked with slow, calm steps between the crowds. Many people joined their palms and bowed as the Buddha passed. Children were lifted onto their parents' shoulders so they could see. Happy shouts and applause rose from the crowds. The bhikkhus continued to follow their breath mindfully in the midst of the bustling, festive atmosphere. King Suddhodana greeted the Buddha and his sangha at the outer gates of the palace. He led them to the inner courtyard. All the guests followed the king's example in joining their palms and bowing deeply to the Buddha, even though some of them wondered why it was necessary to show such great respect to a monk so young, even if he was the former prince. After the Buddha and the bhikkhus were seated, the king motioned to his servants to bring out the food. He himself served the Buddha. Yasodhara and Gotami directed the serving of all the other guests, which included Brahmins, ascetics, and hermits. Everyone ate in silence, following the example of the Buddha and his bhikkhus. When all the bhikkhus and all the guests were finished eating, and the bhikkhus' bowls had been washed and returned, the king stood and joined his palms. He invited the Buddha to teach the Dharma to all those gathered. The Buddha sat quietly for a moment in order to gain a sense of those present. He began by briefly recounting his experience in seeking the way, as he knew the people were anxious to hear what had happened to him in the past 7 years. He spoke to them about the nature of impermanence, the absence of a separate self, and the law of dependent co-arising. He said that practicing awareness in daily life and looking deeply into things led to the cessation of suffering and the realization of peace and joy. He said that offerings and prayers were not effective means to attain liberation. The Buddha taught the Four Noble Truths: the existence of suffering, the causes of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the path that leads to the cessation of suffering. He said, in addition to the suffering of birth, old age, sickness, and death, human beings endure the other sufferings which they themselves create. Out of ignorance and false views, people say and do things that create suffering for themselves and others. Anger, hatred, suspicion, jealousy, and frustration cause suffering. All these arise from lack of awareness. People are caught in this suffering as if they were caught in a house fire. And most of our suffering we create ourselves. You cannot find freedom in praying to some God. You must look deeply into your own mind and situation in order to uproot the false views which are the root of suffering. You must find the source of your suffering in order to understand the nature of suffering. Once you understand the nature of suffering, it can no longer bind you. If someone is angry at you, you can get angry back at him, but that only creates more suffering. If you follow the way of awareness, you will not react with anger. Instead, you will quiet your mind in order to discover why that person is angry at you. By looking deeply, you can uncover the causes that lead to the person's anger. If you see that you bear responsibility for angering the person, you will not become angry, but you will accept that your own misconduct has contributed towards creating his anger. If you are without blame, you can try to see why the person has misunderstood you. Then you can find a way to help him understand your true intentions. In this way, you will avoid causing more suffering to both yourself and the other person. Your Majesty and honoured guests, all suffering can be overcome by looking deeply into things. On the path of awareness, we learn to follow our breath to maintain mindfulness. We follow the precepts in order to build concentration and attain understanding. The precepts are principles. Our ability to concentrate develops, and we are able to live with greater awareness and mindfulness. Mindfulness nurtures the capacity to illuminate the true nature of our mind and our environment. With that illumination comes understanding. Only with understanding can we love. All suffering is overcome when we attain understanding. The path of true liberation is the path of understanding. Understanding is prajna. Such understanding can only come from looking deeply into the true nature of things. The path of precepts, concentration, and understanding is the path which leads to liberation. The Buddha paused for a moment, then smiled before continuing to speak. But suffering is only one face of life. Life has another face, the face of wonder. If we can see that face of life, we will have happiness, peace, and joy. When our hearts are unfettered, we can make direct contact with the wonders of life. When we have truly grasped the truths of impermanence, emptiness of self, and dependent co-arising, We see how wondrous our hearts and minds are. We see how wonderful our bodies, the branches of violet bamboo, the golden chrysanthemums, the clear stream, and the radiant moon are. Because we imprison ourselves in our suffering, we lose the ability to experience the wonders of life. When we can break through ignorance, we discover the vast realms of peace, joy, liberation, and nirvana. Nirvana is the uprooting of ignorance, greed, and anger. It is the appearance of peace, joy, and freedom. Honored guests, take time to look at a clear stream or a ray of early morning sunshine. Can you experience peace, joy, and freedom? If you are still locked in the prison of sorrow and anxiety, you will be unable to experience the wonders of the universe, which include your own breath, body, and mind. The path I have discovered leads to transcending sorrow and anxiety by looking deeply into the true nature. I have shared this path with many others, and they too have succeeded in discovering it for themselves. Everyone was deeply touched by the Buddha's Dharma talk. The king's heart welled with happiness, as did the queen and Yasodhara's. They all wanted to learn more about the methods of looking deeply into the nature of things in order to attain liberation and enlightenment. After the Dharma talk, the king escorted the Buddha and the bhikkhus to the outer gates. The guests all congratulated the king on his son's great attainment. Nigrodha Park was soon transformed into a monastery. The ancient fig trees that grew there provided cool shade. Many new bhikkhus were ordained, and many laypersons, including a number of young people of the Sakya clan, took the 5 precepts. Yasodhara made frequent visits to the Buddha at Nigrodha Park, accompanied by the queen and young Rahula. She listened to his Dharma talks and in private asked him about the relation between practicing the way and performing social service. The Buddha showed her how to observe her breath and practice meditation in order to nourish peace and joy in her own heart. She understood that without peace and joy, she could not truly help others. She learned that by developing deeper understanding, she could deepen her capacity to love. She was happy to discover that she could practice the way of awareness in the very midst of her efforts to serve others. Peace and joy were possible right in the very moment she was working. Means and ends were not 2 different things. Queen Gotami was also making great progress in the practice.